Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 4 o'clock session, our compassion chat with Jim. Try to say that 3 times. Well, as you know, February is the month of hearts and love, and we are really celebrating compassion, love, and kindness. So get used to hearing that word, compassion, quite a bit, because we have a lineup of activities that hopefully will open up your hearts, your minds, to even deliver more compassion than what you ever think you had in your life. There'll be more to come. With that in mind, I have as our guest today, Jim Vandenberg. I think everybody here in this room knows Jim, but maybe you don't know some of these facts about Jim. First off, he and Kathy have been married for 60 glorious years. Isn't that a statement? And they have 2 beautiful children. One daughter went to Amherst, the other one went to Rhodes College. They are the gems, the compassion of their lives. They started out in Iowa. I always want to say Ohio. I want to see you in Ohio somewhere, but I know it's Iowa. And Jim started off at Central College by studying, of all things, economics. But he had a little guardian angel who told him this might be the life for him, that he needed to do something more involved with people because she saw him as an extroverted type of person. And guess what? That led him to changing his path to the ministry. So he went from Central to New Brunswick Theological Seminary, where he received his master's, and then he got his doctorate at McCormick College in Chicago. Now, did he serve? Did he do this congregational pastor work? Yes, he did, because he went to Virginia Theological Seminary, where he was the campus minister, and he loved it. He served there for 9 years.
That was Virginia Tech. They're very different.
What did I say, Jim?
Virginia Theological Seminary.
Thank you.
I would not have anything to do with the seminary.
Well, I almost went there, Jim. Where he served at Virginia Tech. Thank you very much. And then he had other key positions as being a church executive. He has traveled, he has worked, he's been just wonderful. And thank goodness they came to live with us here at Westminster in 2003. Did I get that all right now, except for that? Okay. Anything you want to add?
No.
Okay, very good. So now we'll get into the heart of the conversation, which is a discussion on compassion. So we're going to start off with learning a little bit about our history here in St. Augustine. So Jim, why don't you tell us about how the concept of a compassionate city came into being?
Early in 2008, Karen Armstrong, some of you may know her or have read her books. She's a prolific writer. She's a world-renowned author in religious studies, and in that year she won the TED Award for her research on compassion. And along with $100,000 in those days, which came with the award, she was granted her wish for a better world by the TED Group. And her request, it's amazing, was to build a global community in which all people together could live in mutual respect. Her comment was, if we don't learn how to live together, we're going to die together. And so they were so impressed with it, they agreed with that. So the first learning of significance based on her research was that the principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions, calling us always to treat others as we wish to be treated ourselves. Now, you already recognize that as the golden rule, although there's another golden rule too. He or she who has the gold makes the rules. That's not the case here. If you want to be treated in a certain way, you treat others in that way. That's the golden rule of which she's speaking. Therefore, she asked the TED organization to help her create, to launch, and to propagate a charter for compassion, to which hundreds of thousands of people contributed using the internet and all of that at around 2010, 9-10. And ultimately, it was crafted on a single page, 4 paragraphs on a single page, by what she called a council of conscience. was comprised of notable leaders from 6 faith traditions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Abrahamic traditions, and then Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. And it was finally made public late in 2009. So that was the beginning.
That was the
of what it
beginning.
is.
What a start. And tell us again, remind us again about what TED stands for.
TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And today, every now and again, you'll see on TV, so-and-so gave a TED Talk. I think the TED Talks today are far more brief than what Armstrong and others were doing. They were bringing in pros in those days, and they were really the beginning, oftentimes, of books.
And what was the name of Karen's book?
Karen's book was 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life.
12 Steps to
It's
Compassion.
worth reading, by the way.
Yes. You heard
And
that.
it's not bedtime reading.
So we talk about the word compassion, as I mentioned in the beginning, you'll hear that word resonate throughout the day and hopefully reverberate more in your life. So tell us a little bit more about compassion and the golden rule.
There are probably many, many different meanings of compassion that could be shared. One is that compassion means to feel another's pain as if it were your own. It means to feel, in other words, what others are feeling and enter into their life at that level. When we act with compassion, we show kindness and we show understanding. We try to make others feel better. We put others before ourselves. A lot of people think of compassion as pity. It has nothing at all to do with pity. That's looking down upon rather than looking at and being with. Compassion, somebody else has said, is an unwavering commitment to the good of humanity. It's an unwavering commitment for the good of humanity. Or compassion is care in action. It's a process. It's a way of being. It's not an end in itself. In short, all of these things really say compassion is the golden rule.
So,
And that's what she learned from all 6 of those, faith leaders. They said it differently. Some of them said, do not do unto others what you do not want them to do to you, rather than saying it positively, which the Christian tradition has tended to do, and the Judaic tradition as well.
so would you say empathy encompasses compassion along the way?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, very much so.
But isn't a key point, though, that you mentioned is that you really get to feel somebody else's pain?
Exactly. Yeah.
And often that's very, very tough. So tell us a little bit more.
Well, the Dalai Lama has said, if you want to make others happy, show compassion. If you want to make yourself happy, show compassion. Another person has said, compassion isn't an option, it's the very key for survival. I think that's exactly what Karen Armstrong believed, and that's why she wanted this to be her emphasis. Maya Angelou was not talking about compassion when she said, or was she? When she said, I've learned that some people will, that most people will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did, but they will never, ever forget how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And that really, again, gets back to the compassion issue.
So empathy and also placing others before yourself. Very, very important. So we're getting a little deeper into this story as we go on here. So tell me, how did the Jim Vandenberg we know get involved in Compassion in St. Augustine?
Well, we moved here in 2003, not here, but to St. Augustine, 2003. And I guess it was in something like early in 2011. A friend came up to me at church one Sunday and said, have you read Karen Armstrong's 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life? I said, I have not. It was just really almost brand new. She said, if I gave you a copy, would you read it? I said, sure. She gave me a copy, and I did read it. And then her next question was, Do you believe that if we worked on what she's talking about, we could help St. Augustine become a compassionate city by the year 2015, which was its 450th anniversary? I thought about that only for a minute. I said, absolutely, I'm sure we could. And she said, I think so too. And so we probably didn't even talk about it for 5 minutes, and we began to talk about 2 or 3 other people we wanted to have join us in thinking about that. And we got together and we made some action steps. The moment we did that, we were committed. We knew we were on this journey, and we were on this journey together. So, given that, we identified the first thing we did was to identify an active advisory committee, which came to be known and is known today as the Compassionate St. Augustine. That the committee is known as that. Initially, it was an initiative committee that really got confusing.
So tell us this, how many people did it come up to?
Well, at that time, it came up to probably 7 to 10. Eventually, we were working with a group after a year or two, probably between 15 and 25. They were working at different things at different points, so it's hard to say exactly the number. But having identified that advisory group, we met bi-weekly. We had everyone we knew reading and discussing Armstrong's book. We attended all city commission meetings, prayed when we were asked to pray, signed up to speak during the 3-minute open mic period, which they always have, and we made sure that everyone knew what we were doing and why we were there. We read the Charter for Compassion, which had been prepared in 2009, and we made sure that we started all advisory and public meetings with the Charter of Compassion. We read it. It is just a beautiful piece. When you leave this afternoon, you will get a copy of it. Holly has made copies, so you can carry it with you. We began to work on getting partner organizations to join us, partner organizations and individuals. That means people who were willing to sign or already had signed the charter. And we cooperated with Flagler College speaker program at every point that we possibly could. We made suggestions to them, and they were a wonderful group to work with, particularly because of what we were working on related to a number of things they were working on. So that was happening. We made compassion, if you will, a household word. Wherever we went, we established an appropriate, wherever we went, we did that. We established an appropriate website and Facebook page. We began to secure funding for our startup costs. We worked on getting incorporated in Florida, and we acquired a 501c3 status. We spent considerable time working with commissioners and the city manager, sharing our purpose and our goal in forming a compassionate city and questioning them as to whether they shared our commitments. I worried at a time, we were so into it, that they might begin to see us as PR pests. I don't think that ever happened, I hope not, but by the time we finished the process, they were very, very much with us. In addition, we sought help from other cities. Seattle had been the first compassionate city in the US and in the world. That's where this movement got started. Louisville was very much active in the process. I had occasion to go to Louisville 2-3 times during the time that we were working on this, and ended up having conversations with the mayor and with people who were really running the program in Louisville, and they were really into the program. We would have people come through here saying, my mother lives in Florida, she's retired there, and I'm going to go see her. Would you like for me to stop in? I'd be glad to do this, that, or the other thing. So that's the kind of thing that we managed to get. We got a lot of help from particularly those 2 cities, but not exclusively. The mayor of Louisville wrote the mayor of St. Augustine and said, get with it. So, I mean, things like that were really helpful.
So I gather that was a big boost to the system as well. So, Jim, you mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, you made compassion a household word wherever you went. So when you went home to Kathy, did you say, I'm compassionate about you, or what were the other words that were used to make
No,
compassion a household word?
I would wait until she said, what does compassion mean?
Oh, or what's for dinner, honey?
It was really important, to get people to, because there are many, many meanings of compassion, and according to Armstrong, many of them are wrong. So you really want to talk about compassion in the way she was speaking of it, and particularly in her book.
So now we see some background. We know that it takes commitment. And right away, Jim got a lot of commitment. Jim and the early advisory board members received a lot of commitment for this project. So now we get into really actually what happened. What are the values of a compassionate city?
Of a compassionate city, a compassionate village, a compassionate organization of any kind, there are universities and colleges that have gone through this process and are known as compassionate whatever. The values, the compassionate values an organization demonstrates indicates its level and commitment to humankind. It's that simple. You either have values that really take into account humankind, all of humankind, or you don't. And that's what Karen Armstrong was trying to say when she said, we either live by compassion or we're going to die because we don't have the compassion. Those values are present throughout the fabric of many organizations that we're part of, and also in the bedrock of the culture in which that organization stands. Frequently, its history, its basis. And these values include, among others, these. And I'm going to be very brief because we could spend hours on this. Respect. A key value to seeing and treating all others as beings with values. May not agree with mine, yours, but we respect them to also have values, and we need to hear what they are. Inclusion means that we're willing to build diversity, to accept and welcome all others. Empowerment, that we will empower others to make a difference in their own and in others' lives. And that may be very different from the way you or I would go about doing that. Transparency, that the organization is visible, approachable, and acceptable to those within and to those it serves. Universally positive. It focuses on and respects each individual as a human being. Socially innovative. It encourages all involved to be good stewards of compassion in ways that are personal and authentic to those persons. And radical hospitality. Welcomes everyone unconditionally and creates an open and inviting atmosphere. Now you might say, everyone who's religious? No, everyone. And that's what Karen Armstrong is very fond of saying. She started out a Roman Catholic nun. She couldn't make it in the convent. In short, she got kicked out. But the truth of the matter is she found her place in the university, and she was able to do the things she couldn't ever have done at the convent. And the beauty was that she recognized that different religions were one thing, but there were a lot of people who were struggling, they were searching, they were seeking, they were trying to find out whether any religion fit for them or what fit for them. And they were included as well. So when we talk about radical hospitality, we're talking about people with and without religion.
That's very important. Now, Jim, I can't think of anything that was left off of this list. But as we talked a little bit earlier, prior to this session, a question was asked, tell me a little bit about the inclusion. Was your board representative of the goals that you were trying to achieve?
I'm not sure of the goals we were attempting to achieve, but they certainly were, we were inclusive of the persons who had interest in being part of this. And by that time, we had a compassionate women's group of about 40 people that met on a regular kind of basis, and they came from about 4 or 5 different religious groups that are listed here, even among the 6. So, you know, and the same was true in terms, we had another initiative called Compassion in Action, which was working on criminal justice and prison reform, and of course that involved people from various traditions. So in that sense, yes, very much so.
Good. So now we're moving up the timeline a little bit here, and one of the things I want to ask you about is about the advisory committee. Were they able to realize this goal of having St. Augustine be declared as a compassionate city by June 2015? After all, you were only working on this, if I remember, since 2011.
Right.
That's a pretty short window to pull off this huge task.
My answer is yes, and then some. We had no idea that, you've got to understand that St. Augustine is 15,000 in terms of population or less. It's very easy to work with a city structure that's manageable, that you can get your hands around, that you can talk, where people are open to talk with you. When I saw Louisville, for instance, as an example of how difficult it was to set up my first meetings. Once I had them set up, they were fine. But to get them set up, here you just walked into the Leitner, into the city hall, and you have a conversation with whoever's there, or you ask the secretary or receptionist, who can I talk with about this, and they'll send you down the hall to that office. Very, very different in a small setting. So yes, the true introduction to the nation's oldest city's 450th celebration occurred on September 13, 1913. Why do I say that? That's when our mayor, then Joe Bowles, by means of an appropriately written proclamation, declared St. Augustine to be the first compassionate city in Florida and the 20th in the world.
Hey, I think you skipped a year. It was 2013, correct?
Didn't I say that?
Yeah, it was 2013.
I meant that.
Okay.
Yeah, 2013. And immediately thereafter, because we were such a small city to be able to do that quickly, that Compassion International was really amazed. And so they said to us, would you be willing to work with your sister city in Avilés, Spain, and see if you can't help them become a compassionate city? Because if you could, the two of you could become the first sister compassionate cities. And that's what we did. And that happened in April of 2014. And because of that happening, these two cities have had a long history of relationship with one another. They come over one year, we go back the next year with representatives, that sort of thing. So we weren't dealing with strangers, we were dealing with some of our own.
Very good, very good. I guess it's not too bad if you have to travel over to Spain for a couple days for a meeting.
Some people do it.
Okay, gladly. So now we're coming up and approaching the 450th anniversary. And now I believe that the timeline is correct. You have 9 months away from the actual celebration. So I can imagine things are heating up pretty fast about now.
We were pretty anxious because frankly, it's one thing to say this is what you've done. So how do you share that with tourists? You know, that's our industry. How do you share it with tourists? How do you share it with even people locally so that they know? At the 400th anniversary, 50 years prior to that, there were 2 gifts left by that committee who managed the celebration for the community. One was that huge cross that stands off San Marco. That was one of the gifts. The other gift was the amphitheater. And so here we are talking about a very different kind of thing. People are saying, you want me to support that? Why, this is what my dad did when he was chair of this committee back 50 years ago. And finally you had to say to that person, yeah, that's right. But we're not dealing with 50 years ago, we're dealing with today, and you're part of today. So what legacy are you going to leave? You constantly had to keep people zeroed in because it was so different in terms of what we were doing. So you're asking, what do we do to portray? We probably worked on this at least 6 weeks trying to think of what to do. And then all of a sudden, one day, at one of these bi-weekly meetings, a major art project was recommended, and we immediately submitted a proposal and it was the first public art project to happen within St. Augustine. After 450 years, the first. It's amazing to me. And what we were trying to do was to select some people to imaginatively interpret 4 foundational values of the Spanish Constitution. Why? Because right across the road from Government House, on the plaza in St. Augustine, is a Spanish obelisk from the year 1812. It was the year they were clearly, ended up being democratic. A few years later, they weren't, and it changed, and they wanted all of these obelisks the world over to come down. Well, they didn't know St. Augustine very well at that point. We don't take anything down. We don't destroy anything. The first time we ever took anything down happened this past year. Before that, nothing disappears. And what they did to save the obelisk, on the obelisk were 4 foundational values on the base of it. One was freedom, another democracy, another human rights, and a 4th compassion. Those were hidden actually in the Government House, so they would not be destroyed. And that's why the obelisk was pretty much able to remain where it was. So what we were trying to do was to say, our public art project, what we want to do is to get replicas, 8.5-foot replicas of the 30-foot iconic monument in the park. We want 8.5-foot replicas that will become the canvases for 25 artists to paint. And what they will do is they will all be given an assigned site. That was the worst piece of work we had to do. It's impossible to deal with historical architectural review boards. And St. Augustine has one of the best. And they, everything we would raise, finally we came to an agreement that we would make them temporary and permanent. And they let us get by with almost all temporary. And so, and we set out finding 25 artists, many more ended up applying to be part of it. We had a jury of 3 who were not from the area select those 25, and each was, in essence, assigned, a site. They were given the site. They were told what happened on that site, like in a sentence or 2 sentences. And then they said, we would like to have you paint this site, but to try to make sure that that this city's diverse 450-year storyline resonates with those 4 values. Think of doing that in terms of what it meant for the civil rights issue of 1964 and the Monson restaurant and pool. That was one of the sites. Think of what it meant for the Emancipation Proclamation site. Think of what it meant for 8 different groups that settled in this country over 450 years, and a lot less time actually than that. But there were 8 different groupings, ethnic groupings, that settled here. There was a site for each of them. So that's what the artists were asked to do. And they were given, full opportunity to do it however it made sense to them. All what they got was a site. They got a canvas called an obelisk. And then in addition to that, they They were on their own to do their painting and presenting. And all 25 obelisks were completed by the beginning of June. In addition to that, as we got into this, we
Here comes
realized,
some of the fun part coming up
Yeah.
here.
we got into this, we realized that, it was really, if you're a Floridian, I didn't know this at the time, if you're a Floridian, you learn Florida history in the 4th grade. And so we happen to have somebody on our advisory board who was a teacher in one of the schools, and he worked with artists in those few schools. And so we said to him, well, what do the 4th graders really do with art? He said, not a lot, because, we don't necessarily tie it all in with 4th grade history. And we said, why not? So he agreed to write for us, a plan, a roadmap for all the art teachers. Then we got the head of the art, person in the superintendent's office, and we said to him we would like to have 12 art teachers from St. Augustine, within St. Augustine, to have their 4th grade art classes deal with a 4-foot replica of the Spanish Constitution.
And what about the county?
They said, fantastic. And the county is sitting in on this same thing, because when they get together, they all get together, and there are 28 of them. They said, what are we? You don't want us to be part of this? And this guy didn't know what to say. And finally he said, I'll check. We said, absolutely. So we just had to make, another 18 so that there would be 28 of these. Well, the fascinating thing about the edition is that in many ways, it ended up becoming even more phenomenal. We ended up finally having 3 different sets of what we call Compassion in the Eyes of Children. The first set was as part of this particular program of celebration. The others came after it, the other 2. But the interesting piece was that the quality of their work and the kind of things they did were so phenomenal and superior that when the King and Queen in September came through here, King and Queen of Spain, they had been down in South Florida, they came through here, and whenever the King and Queen of Spain come, or whenever we go there, there's an exchange of gifts. So the City Commission selected one of the 4th grade art projects to give to the King and Queen of Spain. I don't think there was a dry eye from the Queen as long as she was here. The King was so impressed with that gift that he asked who had done it. They told him, and he asked whether there would be any possibility that he and his wife could meet them. And they spent 45 minutes together. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think those 4th graders will ever forget 4th grade, the King and Queen of Spain, or what it meant to be in Florida at that time. And that's what happened. That's what we were able to follow up on later, with the 2nd and the 3rd piece of Compassion Through the Eyes of Children. Now, all 53 of these, they were all done and finished by June 1. And all 53 were exhibited at the Chris Eller Art Museum at Flagler College during the 450th celebration, which happened during the month of June and a little bit of July. And afterwards, the children's obelisks were first exhibited at libraries throughout St. Johns County, and then later they were returned to their school showcases later in the fall. The 25 obelisks went to their specified sites, the one we had worked with Harb on, until January 30. Reason? That's the end of the Nights of Lights. That's the end of real tourism. And then they were placed by their owners or were sold in a local auction.
Okay, so Jim, we're about ready to come out of the end of film time here. Can you tell us a little bit about Miss Claudia Gordon?
Sure. One of the obelisks that was at the government house, just west of the government house in downtown, ended up being purchased by, well, I shouldn't say the obelisk was purchased. You need to know all purchases happened. All money was on the table by people who made a commitment. They didn't make a commitment for a particular obelisk. They said they were helping the cause. And the cause, so her cause, as part of her cause, she was given this obelisk that was painted by Jeff Whipple, that stands here on our green, right on the edge of our green.
Well, if I remember correctly, she was a legacy member. How much money did she contribute?
Yes, well, everybody who owns their obelisk gave $15,000. If you gave $15,000, it's your obelisk. When it's given to you, you can do it with whatever you want to. And so, see, we just had to have sites. The sites were part of the painting and what it meant. And in addition to that, we could only have temporary sites, so when it came to the February 1 of 2016, they had to be transferred from there to a permanent site. Now, this obelisk was never meant to be here. And Claudia Gordon, she died unfortunately in April of 2017. She was a real benefactor of the arts in St. Augustine. She covered one of 4 nights every spring of a music concert that was done there. She was an artist in her own right. She got a degree from where Kathy and I used to live in New York State, New Rochelle, the College of New Rochelle. She ended up wanting hers to go to the Patio House, which is on Avila Street in St. Augustine. That's where she had membership. She spent a lot of time. She gave a lot of both her sweat and her gifts to the Patio House. Patio House, thank you. And the problem was that they would not accept it because it didn't fall within the guidelines of the dates that they accepted things for. She was really chagrined and came back, and she and I talked at length. And finally, I said to her, what about the possibility of having it come here to Glenmore at the time? And she hadn't thought about it. We did think about it, and in a few days, we settled on place. We went through several possibilities, and we settled on the place where it's located. And on Friday, we'll take a walk and we'll go around it and we'll talk about it. By that time, the artist who is working on touching up will probably be finished if the weather agrees with him. So that was one. The other obelisk that was purchased by Glenmore. Hardly anybody knows about that. And that's because the artist for that obelisk died about 2 years ago. And he was really a key artist for the Children's Museum, and they're building a new Children's Museum in St. Augustine. It's not finished yet, and therefore that obelisk, which they wanted to have between the parking garage and the visitor center, and that got turned down as a permanent place, their obelisk will end up being, if Westminster at that point is willing for that to happen, it'll end up being at the Children's Museum. And we were able to sell that to Glenmore. I will say that the key person in helping me do that was Fritz. He said, we need PR in St. Augustine. No one was coming here from St. Augustine in those days. And so we finally managed to say that really should happen. And that's why they wanted it to be where, at the visitor center and the garage, that it would really be. But it'll also be ideal at the Children's Museum once that gets set up. It can be a tremendous PR. And what we'll do is we'll change the plaque on it from Glenmore to Westminster St. Augustine.
So Jim, in one of our last official points in this session, before we go to questions from the audience, tell us in closing, what role did you play? Tell us about the role, because you've been so generous with your time and talent we want to hear about what you did, other than mastermind the project. I know there were some unique things that you contributed.
Well, my role for 4 or 5 years, the first 5 years actually, was to serve as the president of the advisory group. That was a little heady when we were dealing with, particularly with the OA project. That's when it really got tight. And the rest of the time, I did fundraising. There were 2 of us who did fundraising. The OA 450 project, Obelisk Art 450 project, cost $500,000. And the issue was that we hoped we would get roughly 125 to 150 in-kind help, and we did that. But we had to come up with 350 in cash, and it had to be done up front. We didn't have a bank account to really lean on. And so we hoped legacy scholarships were going to cost, sponsorships were going to cost $15K. The next level was going to be 10, the next level 5, next level 2, 2,500. We hoped we'd get 5 or 6 legacy scholarships. We got our first sponsorship, our first sponsorship in December of 14, and we got our last one in May of 15, and we got 21. 21
Isn't that
legacy.
fantastic? That was
And,
unbelievable.
I mean, that tells you what a tight system we had. Everybody was impressed. I mean, they read it. I took it to 2 or 3 people who said, "No, I'm already committed on everything." And I'd say, "Well, will you do me a favor? Will you read it and see what we ought to change? Because we want to have the very best presentation we can make." And they'd read it, and they came back, and 3 of them said, "Hey, look, that's so much better than some of the other things I'm doing. I'll give you 15. So we knew we were on, but to get 21 out of 25, there were another 4 at 10, there were another 6 at 5, and I think there were 4 at 2,500. And then there are a host of people who constantly provided money. So we ended up having all of our money in place by the time the celebration took place.
Well, we know for sure, Jim Vandenberg gave all of his time, his credible talents.
But I didn't give the money because I
Oh,
didn't
shucks,
have it.
I was gonna add that one. Okay, so let's just leave it with time and talents to this wonderful project. So, you just heard a story about Compassion at St. Augustine, and as we know, there are many people in our community that did a tremendous amount of work outside of St. Augustine, and even before we came here, we have a lot to offer. So think about Compassion at St. Augustine, your thoughts, your ideas, and see what we can do to strengthen or incorporate some of the values that Compassion at St. Augustine brings to bear. So with that, I want to say thank you to Jim for our formal part of discussion, and also we'll segue into questions and answers. Okay, thank you.